These Guptas didn't have proper papers. No one dared called them Kwerekweres. No one. But if it was my African brothers, we're going to be called Kwerekweres because they don't have papers. Self-hate. It must come to an end.
There is a man in South Africa who is dividing the planet. Not a head of state, not a general, not a billionaire. A man in a red beret, born in a township without running water, who managed to force his way into the conversations of the world's most powerful leaders. On May 21st, 2025, something historic happens in the Oval Office of the White House. Donald Trump, President of the United States, receives Cyril Ramaphosa, President of South Africa, a high-level diplomatic meeting. And yet, in the middle of this face-to-face meeting between two heads of state, Trump orders the lights to be turned off so that a video can be played. On the screen, Julius Malema. A South African political opponent singing an anti-apartheid struggle song. A man whom Ramaphosa himself had expelled from his party years earlier. How did an activist who came out of poverty in a remote province become the subject of a diplomatic confrontation between Washington and Pretoria? That's what we're exploring today. Who is Julius Malema? Julius Cello. Malema was born on March 3, 1981, in Seshego, a township near Polokwane, in what was then called the Transvaal, now the Limpopo province. His childhood was that of millions of black South Africans of his generation, raised by his mother, a domestic worker, and his grandmother, in a neighborhood marked by poverty and racial segregation. He was 9 years old when he joined the Masupatsela, the ANC Scouts, the historic party of Nelson Mandela. 9 years old. That is where it all begins. In 1994, apartheid officially collapses. Malema is 13 years old. He watches Mandela take the presidential oath and hears the promises of a rainbow nation. Freedom, equality, prosperity. For him and millions of others, those words sound like a promise of the future. But the years pass, and reality does not change fast enough. The townships remain overcrowded. Unemployment remains massive. The land remains in the hands of the same owners. Political democracy had arrived, but economic freedom still had to be conquered. Malema does not keep this frustration to himself. He shouts it. In 2008, at only 27 years old, he is elected president of the ANC Youth League. His fiery speeches attract crowds. His bluntness disturbs people. And very quickly, he becomes too troublesome for the party establishment. In 2012, he is expelled from the ANC for having, according to the party, damaged its reputation. In reality, he had dared to publicly criticize Jacob Zuma, then president of the country and leader of the ANC. In July 2013, he founds his own party, the Economic Freedom Fighters, the EFF. The name itself is a program, the Fighters for Economic Freedom. The EFF and the rise to power. The EFF contests the general elections as early as 2014. Result: 6.35% of the national vote and 25 seats in parliament. For a party that had just been created, it was a spectacular entry onto the South African political scene. Their visual identity is as strong as their message. Members wear red overalls and red berets, a reference to workers and African liberation movements. They position themselves as a radical, anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist, openly Marxist force. In the 2019 elections, the EFF rises to nearly 11% and wins 44 seats. During the 2024 elections, the party declines slightly to just under 10% of the national vote, in a context where a new party, Jacob Zuma's Umkhonto we Sizwe, captures part of the protest electorate. Despite this decline, the EFF remains the country's fourth largest party in terms of parliamentary representation. But what truly gives Malema his strength is not the electoral numbers. It is his ability to put questions on the table that nobody else dares to ask out loud. At the heart of his message, the land. The land. Question in South Africa. Land is not simply an economic asset. It is the central symbol of a historical injustice stretching back centuries. The facts are documented. In 1994, at the end of apartheid, 87% of the land was in the hands of white owners, who represented less than 10% of the population. The white minority controlled the vast majority of the country's productive farms. 30 years after the end of apartheid, the situation has partially evolved. According to the most recent available data, around 72% of private agricultural land remains owned by white individuals, who today represent around 7% of the population. As for black populations, who make up more than 80% of South Africans, progress has been made through land reform programs, but structural inequalities remain considerable. In 1994, the ANC promised to transfer 30% of agricultural land to black owners by 1999. That target was never reached. The deadline was pushed back to 2010, then to 2015, and then it practically disappeared from the political debate. Malema, however, refuses to let the issue fade away. He demands expropriation without compensation. In other words, taking land from major owners without financially compensating them, in order to redistribute it to those who had been dispossessed. In January 2025, President Ramaphosa signed a new expropriation law, which allows, in certain very limited circumstances, expropriation by the state. But contrary to what Trump and others claimed, this law does not amount to a massive nationalization of land. Property rights remain protected by the South African Constitution. The international reaction to the mere mention of expropriation was intense. Analysts raised the specter of Robert Mugabe's Zimbabwe, where a brutal land reform program in the 2000s destabilized the economy. Malema himself sought to distance his vision from that example, insisting that his project is not chaotic confiscation, but an organized historical correction. The White House incident, and then comes the moment of May 21, 2025. Donald Trump receives Cyril Ramaphosa at the White House in a tense diplomatic context. Since the beginning of his second term, Trump had suspended American aid to South Africa, launched a program welcoming white Afrikaner refugees, and publicly supported the claim of a white genocide in the country. A claim that South African courts themselves described as not real and clearly imagined in a February 2025 ruling. In the middle of the meeting, Trump orders the lights in the Oval Office to be turned off. He plays a 5-minute video. In it appears Julius Malema, leader of an opposition party expelled years earlier from Ramaphosa's ANC, singing anti-apartheid struggle songs, including the song Kill the Boer, which literally means kill the white farmer. Ramaphosa tries to explain that Malema does not represent the government, that the ANC distanced itself from the song more than a decade ago, that Malema is in the opposition, in vain. The moment spread across the world, and paradoxically, it projected Malema onto the international stage like never before. A political opponent with no government portfolio had suddenly found himself at the center of a confrontation between two heads of state. Experts in South Africa were unanimous. There is no evidence that white farmers are systematically targeted because of their race. According to South African police statistics, of the 12 murders recorded in farming communities during the last quarter of 2024, only one involved a white farmer. The other victims were black farm workers. In a country where the homicide rate is among the highest in the world, with around 45 murders per 100,000 inhabitants, according to 2023 data, violence is above all criminal, not racial. A man facing justice. But while Malema was being thrust into major geopolitical debates, his legal situation was taking a serious turn. In October 2025, Malema was found guilty on 5 charges linked to a case dating back to 2018. During an EFF rally in a stadium in the Eastern Cape province, he had fired a semi-automatic rifle into the air in front of around 20,000 supporters. The charges included illegal possession of a firearm and ammunition, as well as discharging a firearm in a public place. On April 16, 2026, the court sentenced him to 5 years in prison. His lawyers immediately appealed, and the appeal request was granted. Malema was released, pending the outcome of the judicial process, which he said he intended to pursue all the way to the Constitutional Court. Outside the courthouse in Kugompo, formerly East London, hundreds of supporters dressed in red chanted his name. For them, the conviction is political. For his opponents, it is simply justice taking its course. What is certain is that under the South African Constitution, any person sentenced to more than 12 months in prison without the option of a fine, and whose conviction is not overturned on appeal, cannot sit in Parliament for 5 years. Malema's political future now depends on the courts. Conclusion. So, is Julius Malema a threat? That depends on whom you ask. For established institutions, for foreign investors, for those who benefit from the status quo, yes, probably. Because Malema asks questions that many would prefer to leave unanswered. Can lasting reconciliation truly be built without real redistribution? Can a democracy survive when economic inequalities remain so glaring, 30 years after the official end of segregation? These questions are not unique to South Africa. They resonate across the African continent, where other countries are questioning colonial legacies in their natural resources. In Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger, governments nationalized mines between 2023 and 2024. A wave of reclaiming national resources unfolding within a broader context of post-colonial reassertion. Malema is neither Mandela nor Mugabe. He is something else. A voice of anger, structured into a political program that has found a powerful echo among the youth and those excluded from economic growth. His judicial trajectory is uncertain today. His political future is equally uncertain. But one thing is clear: the questions he raises will not disappear with him. And perhaps that is the real threat he represents. Not violence, not chaos, but the uncomfortable truth that nobody wants to confront. That's it for this episode. If this content gave you a new perspective, share it with those around you. Subscribe to follow our next analyses of the world. And as always, stay curious, stay informed,